Let me tell you a story. It's a story that takes place on this little planet that we call our home. It's a story about death, doom, and destruction. Now, I know that might be a little bit of a macabre topic to start things off on, but I think it's something that is deeply important. The idea of death. Everybody in this room is hurtling towards the end of their life with each passing second. The true reality, the unavoidable reality, is that someday, sometime, we are all going to die. This is something that has plagued me, tormented me, tortured me, in all honesty, for quite a while now. How do we deal with the idea of death? How do we deal with the idea of suffering? Because if we take the story that is our existence, if we take the entire cosmic universe and everything that is in it, our lives are but a tiny smudge of ink on a single page in that grand book. Nihilism is the fear of death. The fear that things are eventually going to end and that our lives are ultimately meaningless. And nihilism is something that has encapsulated the human collective for a long time now. Let me introduce you to a painting by artist Edvard Munch. It is called The Scream, and it was created in 1893. It depicts a figure who is clasping his hands to his cheeks. His face is contorted, twisted, tortured. The artist Edvard Munch came up with the idea for this painting when he was taking a walk. He describes how he saw the sunset, he saw the clouds that were blood red, and he said that he heard an infinite scream passing through nature. This painting has taken on a new sort of meaning in that it represents the anxieties and the fears of humanity as a whole. It represents the death that we are so afraid of. We might not be screaming all the time, but inside, I can guarantee you that we are afraid of death. We are afraid of the suffering that encapsulates our lives. And the worst part about it all is that this suffering has no explicit meaning. Let me bring things down a few notches to my own personal story. This is the story of how I first encountered death. I remember exactly where I was, exactly what I was doing when I first learned that my aunt passed away. I was in the back seat of my car, looking out the window, looking at the trees as they were floating by, when a family member told me that my aunt passed away. This person who I had formed an unbelievable amount of memories and experiences and emotions with, they were suddenly no longer there. They didn't exist anymore. My emotional attachment, my feelings towards my aunt, were they all of a sudden invalidated? Did they mean nothing? I mean, the person itself literally didn't exist anymore. My aunt was gone. She was never coming back. How did I deal with that? I know that a lot of people, the majority of people, in fact, deal with similar circumstances where they lose a loved one or they encounter death. And a particularly difficult thing for us to do as human beings is to engage with death, to engage with the nihilism that torments and tortures us. Let me introduce you to a man called Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche. He was a 19th century German philosopher, and his story, his life, was one that was innately filled with suffering. He had to go through decades of work while being under-recognized. His ideas were completely dismissed and thrown in the bin. He wrote countless books trying to dissect the meaning of life, the meaning of suffering. What is the point of death? but his ideas were ultimately made redundant. Towards the end of his life, Nietzsche went completely mad and he died alone. Once he died, his sister took all of his life's work and sort of twisted it into Nazi propaganda, which ultimately wasn't really the best look for his ideas. But by looking at Nietzsche's ideas and his philosophy in a completely different light, we can start to dissect some of these questions that I propose to you. How do we deal with nihilism? How do we deal with suffering? Well, the first thing that we can do is look within ourselves to make ourselves stronger. Nietzsche proposed an idea called the will to power. Essentially, what the will to power is an innate force within human beings to drive themselves to be stronger, more dominant, and more powerful. I say strength, dominance, and power, not in terms of physical strength, although that is a facet of it, but more so in terms of mental strength, mental dominance, mental power, to push yourself beyond what you are capable of. Death, according to Nietzsche, is, yes, an inevitable thing, but it is something that we must tackle. It is something that we must engage with in order to move past it. We must grow ourselves to become better, more articulate, more confident people if we want to ultimately engage, tackle, and move past these ideas that torment us. To quote verbatim from Nietzsche, what is more painful than suffering itself is meaningless suffering. Suffering without a purpose, without a meaning. But according to Nietzsche, the point of existence is that there is no point. There is no meaning to our lives. There is no reason that we exist. But that's okay. It's okay that there isn't a reason for our suffering. It's okay that we suffer for no particular reason at all. The thing that we must learn to accept, recognize, and engage with is that we must grow ourselves to be stronger people, in his words. Let me introduce you to another painting. This one is called Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog. It is by painter Caspar David Friedrich. It is an incredibly moving painting. It depicts a man standing on the very pinnacle of a mountain, looking out onto a landscape, a misty, eerie landscape. It is a classic work of the Romantic period, and it has been very widely interpreted to be a metaphor for the human condition. It reflects the human urge to look within oneself, to reach the top of the mountain, to achieve the heights, the pinnacles that we all desperately want to achieve. And I feel like this painting is the perfect encapsulation of what Nietzsche calls the will to power. It is learning to grow, learning to climb that mountain, to climb the cliffs. However sheer, however steep they may seem, you must try to grow higher, to reach the top. It is a battle within yourself. It is a pursuit to make yourself better, the best possible version that you can be. Then we have eternal recurrence, another idea proposed by Nietzsche. Imagine your life is a constant loop. As soon as you die, everything starts over again. Your entire life is a bit like a video that's played on repeat again and again and again. You die, and then everything that happened, all the experiences, memories, emotions since you were a child are played back again. You essentially have to relive everything that you've already gone through. How would that make you feel? Because you would have to relive the most down, depressing, and lowest points in your life. The moment where you were at your absolute breaking point, the moment where you felt like completely and utterly giving up, breaking down, shattering into a million different pieces. You would have to go and relive that moment again and again and again. What about your happiest moment? The moment where perhaps you were surrounded by loved ones, the moment where you maybe achieved something that you had always wanted to, the moment where you were completely filled with joy and pleasure and gratitude. Would you relive that moment again and again and again and again? I think the answer to that question is yes. Most of us want to relive our happy moments again. Nietzsche said that if we learn to think of life like this, as a metaphorical loop, we will strive to make our lives as happy and as pleasurable as we possibly can. If we strive to make ourselves better people by enhancing our experiences, by growing stronger, then when we do relive our lives again and again and again, it won't be so bad when we look at it in the context of all the happy moments versus all the not so happy moments. According to Nietzsche, suffering is necessary in life. Suffering is what we need to grow stronger. Without suffering, without the idea of death that looms as a constant reminder over our existence, there wouldn't be a point to living life. Eternal recurrence is the idea that suffering and happiness are both necessary, are both an equal part of life. They are both innate to life. They are both inseparable from the condition that humans live in. In the grand scheme of existence, we must learn to accept and live with our suffering. It mustn't be a hindrance to us, but a way, a motivation to push us forward. This isn't to say that suffering is innately good. We're not talking about morality here. We're essentially saying that suffering and death and desperation is necessary. Without it, our lives would lack any sort of meaning or substance. I think I learned a lot of lessons by looking at Nietzsche's work, and I was able to apply that to my own experience with death. How did I deal with death is a question that I still don't fully know the answer to. But like everything in life, I've been pushing myself to grow beyond my initial perceptions, to look at life in a different way, to look at death in a different way, because nihilism is something that affects us all, even if we don't realize it. But learning to tackle that nihilism, learning to push back against it, is what we must all do if we want to become better people. And so, in regards to my own experience with death, I acknowledge it as something that was painful. It was one of the most vulnerable times in my life, losing somebody that was so dear to me. But it is something that I must learn to accept and live with. I mustn't try and shove it out of the way, try and pretend that it didn't exist, that I just have to forget about it and move on. I have to use those experiences to shape me and influence me to be a more well-rounded and solid person. This is how we must approach death. This is how we must approach nihilism. This is how we must approach the suffering that encroaches upon our daily lives. Let me end with this quote by William Shakespeare. All the world's a stage. There are lots of different ways to interpret this quote, but one of my favorite interpretations is that everything that happens in our lives is a bit like a story. It's a story that's being constantly written, a story that has a playwright, an author. In the grand scheme of our existence, yes, our lives may seem like insignificant little sentences, but in our lives, in our individual lives, in the lives of each and every single person here, there is a lot to be told. There is a lot to be discovered. Your life is a stage, and you are the playwright that has to decide what to put on that stage. Your life is your story. To take all the lessons that we've learned so far, the will to power, eternal recurrence, trying to push yourself beyond your maximum capacity, to learn to live with your suffering and your pain, to learn to live with your desperate moments, but also your happiest moments, to turn all of that into the next pages, the next chapters in your life story. And when you look at life from this perspective, as one massive book that has yet to be told, death almost seems like the final full stop on the final line of the final page of the final chapter in that book. Every story must have an ending. That's unavoidable. But it's oftentimes the ending that makes a good story what it is. In the stories that are your and mine lives, the end should be the best part of that story. The journey to that story is what makes it truly great. We are the authors of our stories, and the stories that have yet to be told are the stories that we are destined to write. Thank you.